Hey, what's going on, everybody? Justin here at Trumpful Reads, and in this video, we're going to be doing a book review of one of my very short introduction books. I try to read one a month when I can, and I primarily try to read like history ones or philosophy ones or life science-based ones because that's just what I like to read for nonfiction. And in this one, we're going to be doing Plants by Timothy Walker. And like I said, I was kind of interested in this one just because it's kind of just a huge overview of plants, which I'm interested in as part of the life sciences, especially. And let's just say it was kind of the topics that this book covered were actually kind of not what I was expecting, I guess. I was a little nervous at first. There's a big section on basically plant taxonomy, which is sort of how you structure and group like the genus and species and family, order, class, and phyla and all that stuff in the plant kingdom. Basically, which ones are related to what, and which like families and groups are older than other ones, and things like that. And that was kind of, I didn't really care that much about. I mean, it's a little important to know. I thought that it was a little bit too much dedication to that sort of topic, I guess, for a very short introduction. I mean, I did learn some tidbits that were interesting about, especially like the algae, which are kind of like a focus species. As an example, basically, between like the blue, green, brown, red algae, and it was kind of interesting that brown algae is not even a plant at all, which I guess I didn't realize. It's pretty much an animal, so that's kind of interesting. But anyways, once we get past that, it moves on to the more like nuts and bolts about plants, like basically their different structures, like the roots and the stems, and then like the stamens, all that kind of stuff. Leaves, everything like that. So it does that, and then also we cover basically the major groupings of plants, like such as the algae and like the mosses and liverworts, which I didn't even really realize what a liverwort was. I mean, I've always heard that term floating around, but I didn't know really what it was until this book, which was kind of interesting. Then you go into like the ferns, and then the gymnosperms and angiosperms, which are basically the flowering plants. So covers quite a bit. I do wish there was more focus on just kind of like unique species, maybe not unique species, but more like typical species, and kind of going into like really detailed examples of like all their parts and stuff, rather than just sort of like there's like like a paragraph or two on like roots and stems. Well, I think there's like a page on stems, but I just thought there could be a little bit more showing like the differentiation between like different types of species, between like maybe like trees and shrubs and flowers for like the stems and stuff, because it's totally different basically. But it is a good like kind of just really brief overview. But like I said, I think if they would have taken like maybe 10 pages out of that taxonomy portion and put it in there, probably would have been a little bit more fulfilling in that area. Now there were a few pieces of information that I guess I've never really thought to think of or realize, but I thought were really interesting. For example, like I think it was 80% of flowering plants have no actual way of apparatus or way or function of actually dispersing their seeds pretty much in any manner at all. They just basically just like fall to the ground, and some of those like wind doesn't even really do much for them. Not that wind is actually that successful. It goes on. That's why there's trillions and quadrillions of basically seeds on like big trees and stuff, is basically because the wind is just really bad at helping you like find a place to like germinate the seeds and stuff. But it was also interesting to learn that animal pollinators really aren't like that successful or good either. Basically from wild observations and in the lab. So that was kind of interesting. Then there was a really cool section that I like, basically kind of like on a historical perspective, and I think the chapter was called like "What a Plant's Ever Done for Us," and it's basically this sort of goes just a brief sketch over basically the symbiosis between humans and like cultivated plants, especially basically throughout history back to basically like the last ice age, from like archaeological evidence and stuff, which is really cool. Seeing basically like pollen samples in like basically like Neanderthal caves and stuff. Just really interesting seeing like the first types of plants that were basically cultivated for obviously for like grain purposes as like a steady yearly crop and stuff. So that was kind of interesting on that aspect, just because I'm really into history as well. And also, what was really interesting about this book is the last chapter. I want to make sure I get this right. Is about the Convention on Biological Diversity in the plant-based portion of that, which is basically like the United Nations of like biologists almost, and they came up with like the 16-point program that they want to try and implement on a worldwide scale, basically to either protect species or conserve them or rescue them, all kinds of stuff, basically about plants. And it was really interesting because like I wasn't expecting that to be thrown in there, but he does go over basically every single point and basically how different countries are either succeeding or failing at them, and how as a whole the countries are doing fairly decently at trying to meet these points. Obviously they're not hitting a lot of them, but realistically the goals are obviously set to like really lofty standards, but they're countries are actually doing fairly decent now that they got these in place since like the 90s, and it's been revised a couple times. But it was just really interesting to see what is actually being done to preserve and conserve plants around the world. Like I said, this is like a worldwide effort. It was kind of just, like I said, interesting to see basically on a global scale all the basically dedicated resources that countries are sort of pulling together or independently using to do different types of programs and stuff based on what's been successful and what hasn't been and stuff. So like I said, this book was kind of weird in the way it was structured and the way it actually covers plants. Like the middle half of the book is all about, actually what you would think of when you think about studying plants or writing a book about plants. But the first part is a lot of like taxonomy stuff. And then at the end we have a lot of, historical, cultural, contextual history of plants, which is really interesting. And then the last chapter, like I said, was this sort of basically the legal and political aspect of countries trying to do what they can to preserve plants for the future and protect them. So like I said, it was a very broad definition of like basically an introduction to plants. In a way, I really enjoyed that. In a way, well, I say in a way I didn't really like it. It was more just I thought the beginning portion of the book could have been cut down a little bit, because actually I did like the contextual history stuff. And actually, even though I don't think the last chapter fit perfectly well, it felt kind of strange reading it, to be honest. It was really enlightening to see what was actually going on, so I'm really glad it was actually put into the book. So because of that, all these things together, I think I'm going to give Plants a Very Short Introduction by Timothy Walker 4 out of 5 books. If you guys have read any good books on plants or flowers or trees or anything like that, leave a comment down below so I can definitely go check it out and add it to my list. And just tell me what you thought about this book. Or if you've read any other very short introductions that you think I should give a shot, definitely leave comments down below for that as well. And always remember, whatever you end up reading, read victoriously.